Hello and welcome to a millinery product review video. My name is Ilona, I'm a milliner based in London, and today I'm going to be using the Procion MX dye kit that I bought online. These dyes are slightly different to acid dyes, which use an acid to set the colour into the material that you're dyeing. These dyes are fibre reactive dyes and they use soda ash as a fixative. Let's gather the materials and get started. What I want to do today is to mix up all the four colours that come in the kit. We've got lemon yellow, fuchsia, turquoise and jet black. They come with recipes to make every single colour on this colour wheel. Once I've mixed all those up, I want to test those on various different fibres. So I've got some fibres prepared already. This is actually a cotton and polyester mix because I couldn't find any scrap fabric that was 100% cotton. Then I've got some wool felt just to see how it would work. I doubt it will actually work well on wool felt because it's supposed to be used on celluloid fibres, and wool felt is a protein fibre. Then I've got some straw from an old parasisal capelin that I've cut up for the purposes of this experiment. This is the fibre that I think is going to work the best with these dyes because it is a cellulose fibre. And just to also test it on something a little bit different, this is a viscose petersham ribbon. I'd like to take you through a little bit of colour theory. Technically, you should only need 4 colours to be able to make all the colours under the rainbow. And if you're familiar with how printers work, you'll know this very well. It's CMYK. Let me show you what comes in the kit and we'll open it up and have a go. I've got here the 004 lemon yellow, 040 fuchsia, 068 turquoise, 150 jet black. And it says on the packet, cold water dyes for cotton and other plant-based fibres. Let's open up the package. We've got our soda ash dye fixer, which is an alkali, I believe, versus the acid dyes that use acid, such as vinegar or citric acid. What's really interesting is this turquoise dye does not look turquoise at all in the packet. It looks a rather kind of sandy brown colour. And fuchsia looks like a kind of dried rusty red. And yellow looks like it's supposed to, it's yellow. According to the back of the packet, Procion MX cold water dyes are fixed with soda ash instead of with heat, a property which makes them indispensable for dyeing projects. Exceptionally permanent on cotton and other plant-based fabrics. The colours are outrageously bright and they never fade even with repeated washing. Well, we're not going to have a problem with repeated washing on hats, but I'm very interested to see as to how these will dye parasisal straw, or in fact any straw in general. I have tried to dye straw using the acid dyes and the colours aren't exceptionally vibrant. You can get very nice pastel shades, but I'm also concerned that they might fade with time. I obviously haven't had many years to test out whether a Jacquard acid dye will fade on straw or not, but I just suspect that it might do. So hopefully these won't. And also the fact that you can set these in cold water means that you won't necessarily damage the straw by having to boil it up in a big vat. The kit comes with a handy little complex colours mixing ratios. Oh, okay, so we've got a whole colour wheel of instructions down here, and then we've got some interesting colours on the back. I don't know if I have enough sample materials to try all these fun colours, but maybe I'll be able to rummage something from the back of the cupboard and give all of these colours a go. There's no actual big instruction sets in the packet, which is a bit of a shame. It says on the soda ash dye fixer, for complete instructions, have a look at our website. So I'm going to quickly load that up, have a read, and come back and start mixing.
1 hour later.
Right, I'm back. I've read the instructions, and unluckily for me, they are all in imperial, not in metric, so I've had to do a lot of conversions and a lot of maths, and I will stick the recipe and instructions and quantities just over here next to me, so you can take a screenshot if you use metric and use that for your reference. And if you use imperial, go and have a look at the official instruction booklet. I'll link to it in the description box below. Apart from the Procion MX die, I will also need a set of jewellery scales, various mixing implements. I've got some chopsticks and a silicone spatula, some large 10ml pipettes, some measuring spoons. These are 1 teaspoon, half a teaspoon and a 1/8 teaspoon measure, and they are not to be used in the kitchen. These are for dyeing purposes only. Some table salt. I'll need to add this to the dye solutions. Some pH neutral washing up liquid. This is for the rinsing stage of the process. And lastly, lots and lots of jars and containers. Once again, these are not to be used in the kitchen. These are all from my dyeing cupboard. What I've already done is I've decanted the soda ash into a jar so that it's easier to access. I guess we'll just start mixing. I'm going to start with the black. Water plus salt plus dye. Oh, and I forgot to mention the water needs to be tepid, so my water is at 40 degrees Celsius. I guess I should stir it. I feel like the salt hasn't dissolved in this, even though the water was warm. The next step is to immerse wet fabric. I've got my wet fabric here. Here's a bit of viscose petersham. Here's a bit of parasisal straw. Here's a bit of cotton mixed with polyester. And here is the one I think will be least successful, some wool felt. Then I need to add the soda ash. And now I stir for 10 to 15 minutes. While the black is steeping, I figured we should go ahead and do all the other colours. I've got my water prepared, it's warm. I'm going to add the salt, the dye. Next, let's do the fuchsia, and last up, the yellow. Let's give each of these a stir. I'm not going to be adding the fibres or the soda ash in just yet because I want to use these to mix other colours. I'm going to make my way around this wheel, and I'm going to start with the yellow and turquoise mixes. I'm choosing to interpret the parts as millilitres, but if you wanted to do it by volume, I guess you could. while all those sensible colours are setting themselves in all the dye baths, I thought we'd mix some of the fun colour options that we have on the back of the little colour chart. Let's start with Periwinkle, as Very Peri is this year's colour of the year according to Pantone. So I need 1 part fuchsia and 19 parts turquoise. I'm going to double this, so I'm going to do 2 parts fuchsia and 38 parts turquoise. Next one I want to try is going to be the Vermilion. 4 parts turquoise, 17 parts fuchsia and 36 parts yellow. Blue-grey, 1 part fuchsia, 80 parts turquoise. Do I have enough turquoise? And 20 parts black. I'll have to get that from the previous dye bath that already has soda ash in it. That looks very, very dark. My guess is that eventually, once you put something in this, it will not take on all that darkness, but take on the turquoisey colour. Olive green, 1 part fuchsia, 16 parts turquoise. I am fast running out of turquoise. And 17 parts lemon yellow. Oh, that's going to be a very, very lovely green. I don't think the camera's picking up the subtleties and intricacies of this particular colour. And one last one, let's try the burgundy. 6 parts fuchsia, 9 parts yellow, 7 parts turquoise, and 6 parts black, once again from the previous dye bath. And this time I will remember to add soda ash to every single one of these. And then add in my fibre. This time round I'm only going to do straw.
15 minutes later.
The next step is to rinse everything, and for this you require a neutral pH soapy water. And as I've got some universal indicator, I figured let me just test that my water is indeed neutral. I've dissolved some fairy washing up liquid in this. Let's see. We're looking for a nice green colour once it dries. I think that looks like the 7. Perfect. Let's rinse things. For this step, I'm going to put some gloves on. I'm going to start with the black things, and I'm going to use some chopsticks to fish things out. Ooh, gosh, that's picked up the dye so well. About halfway through the process, I had a look at this, and it looked blue, not black, but now it's looking very black. The felt is more grey, but that's only to be expected, as it's not the right fibre to use with this dye. Hardly any dye has come off in the rinse, which is good. Oh, look at how black this piece of straw looks. Oh, that's very good. Oh, this is so much better than the Jacquard dyes. I need to take these over to the sink and then rinse the soap off them, but once I've done that, I will let them dry and come back and evaluate all the results.
The next day.
All my samples have dried. Let's go through them and have a look at how the colours have worked out. Here are all the samples. I'm going to compare each of them to the undyed fibres over here and also to the colour chart with all the recipes. I should mention that the proportion of dye powder to the water bath was all calculated as the medium depth of shade, so you can take these lighter or darker by using more or less powder within the dye bath. I've got them organised as turquoise, fuchsia and lemon yellow, and then we've also got the black over here. Let's start with talking about the black. The viscose ribbon and the straw have taken on the colour incredibly well. Look at how black and deep this black looks. Whereas the cotton mixed with polyester and the wool felt have not taken on the colour so well. That's because the wool felt is a protein fibre and the cotton has a polyester mix in it, so only the cotton is taken on the dye and not the polyester. That's why it looks a bit grey. If this had been 100% cotton, I think it would have taken the dye just as well as the viscose ribbon and the straw. As you can see from the spread on the table, the wool and the polyester cotton mix have not dyed to the fullest possible shade like the ribbon and straw fibre. So I'm just going to take these all away and we don't have to talk about them. If you want to dye these kind of fibres, the best dyes to use are the acid dyes, and I've already linked to that video in the top right. If you want to dye polyester fibres, then you'll need to use a specific dye that is good for polyester. I don't know anything about that, so you'll have to do your own research. Before we go ahead and have a look at how well the colours have turned out, I want to point out a few mistakes that I made during my experiments. If you look over here, you can see on this particular colour little splotches of dye. And what this is the dye powder did not dissolve fully in the water, and that's totally my mistake. I needed to stir more, or maybe my water should have been just a little more warmer when I mixed the dyes in. There's nothing I can do about this now, but for the future, I'll just stir more. Another mistake that I have potentially made is, I wonder if you can see on this one, there's a bit of a gradient on this ribbon, and that's because this ribbon wasn't fully immersed in the water as I had thought it would have been. I think to counteract this, next time I would just use more dye bath water than I think is necessary. Moving on to the actual colours, I'm going to start with the turquoise over here. It is less deep than the colour on the wheel. Now obviously this is just representative, that you can't really use the colour wheel as samples, but I can compare it to the turquoise version of the acid dyes, and I think that looks a lot more turquoisey than the Procion dye mix. However, you can just about see on the turquoise sample in the acid dye mix that it hasn't fully dyed the straw. You can see the natural colour of the straw coming through, and that's because the acid dyes aren't designed to work with cellulose fibres. They are designed to work with protein fibres like silk, feathers, wool, so anything that comes from animal production. Whereas the cellulose fibres are wood pulps used in viscose or cotton plants. So even though the acid dye colours are more vivid, you're going to get a more consistent result with the Procion dyes. As far as the rest of the colours go, the instructions said to keep them in the dye bath for 10 to 15 minutes, and I did that on a few of these, but the colour did not take as well as leaving it in for an hour or so. So this black was in the black dye bath for about an hour, and I think that's done it a lot of good. I would recommend that you soak it for about an hour, not for 10 to 15 minutes like the instructions say. I think it definitely needs longer. Let's have a look at these purples. This light one over here was the 97 parts turquoise and 3 parts fuchsia. It has given a very different colour to what this chart is suggesting. This chart is suggesting that it should give us an indigo colour, which is what the dye water looked like. It looked this colour, but once it's come out, it's gone this light lilac purple colour, which I do actually like more than this one, but it's definitely not this dark indigo. To get this dark indigo shade, I think if you added a few more drops of black, you would get this colour. And on the end here, we've got this one, which is 1 part turquoise and 9 parts fuchsia, so very close to just being all fuchsia. And if we compare these two, actually, this is 100% fuchsia, and this is fuchsia with 1 drop of the turquoise. They look incredibly similar. In fact, actually, I don't think I would be able to tell the difference in these two. Then we've got this red. It has definitely turned out like a true red. I think this is one of my favourite colours out of the whole lot. It's very, very vibrant, and it's very, very red. It's a warm toned red, so it's not like a fiery red. The vermilion, which is from the back of the colour recipe chart, this has turned out like quite a fiery red, I think. It's definitely a more yellow toned red, and it's also slightly duller. I think that's probably because of the turquoise we added in. Here are the straws from the complex colours mixing ratios from the back of the card. This is the vermilion one, which I've already shown. It does not look like the colour on the card. It's actually closer to the red from the colour wheel. This is why you've always got to try all the recipes and make your own samples, because you never know how it's going to turn out until you try. This one was the periwinkle. It's very similar to the colour reference that we've got on there, and I think this is the best one from the ones I tried from the back of the card. Burgundy, which I don't think looks burgundy at all. I think it looks like a dark grape purple colour. Blue-grey, I would actually call this steel blue because it's not soft enough to be a blue-grey. I think I would have added maybe a little bit more fuchsia to it to soften that out, make it slightly more purple, make it a bit more powdery. And then lastly, olive green. This very much does look like olive green, but the colour on the reference looks nothing like it once again, so that's a shame. One last thing I'd like to compare are some other ribbon dye samples using the same ribbon as I did with the Procion MX dye, but with the Jacquard acid dyes instead. This is to show you the differences between using an acid dye on protein fibers and a fiber reactive dye for the cellulose fibers. If I overlay these ribbons, you'll be able to see some differences. The yellow is pretty spot on, as are these kind of lime greens, but everything else is completely wrong. This is supposed to be the magenta, or rather the fuchsia, as the colour company calls their dye. I mean, these recipes are different. These colours stuck to the paper are my own recipes, and I think actually this is something that I would like to do for these Procion MX dyes, is actually play around with my own recipes to get my own colours, because I'll be honest, I'm not too happy with the distribution of the colour wheel colours. There are practically no blues in these mixes. Everything is either too pink or too yellow and green, so I think I need to redo those recipes. The other thing to note is how unevenly the viscose ribbon has dyed with the acid dye compared to the even coverage of the Procion dyes. So essentially, use the right dye with the right fibre and it will turn out fine, but if you try and mix and match, it's obviously going to go wrong. And that's it for my Procion MX review and testing, and as you could probably tell, I wasn't quite sure what I was doing, but I figured that this would give you all a more rounded and realistic expectation of how these dyes can be used on your first go, and I hope I provided some interesting insights for you. If you've enjoyed today's video, please like and subscribe. This really helps me grow and reach a larger audience. If you'd like to support my work further, you can do so via Patreon or give me a tip on Ko-fi. If you'd like to follow my work on a more daily scheduled basis, you can follow me on Instagram at Ilona Millinery. Also, don't forget to check out the Jacquard acid dye video that I've linked to in the top right for more information on other ways to work with dyes. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.